Pigeons 420. Mr. Grow It. And Rob from Cannabis Lifestyle TV. From the Stash Podcast.
This show is brought to you by Dutchpro USA. Nutrients made for growers by growers. From the base nutrients to the Explode Booster. Dutchpro USA is bringing you the essentials that all growers need without the extra bottles. Visit Dutchpro USA or find their products on Amazon.com. Spider Farmer LED. One of the leaders in affordable quality LED lighting for growers. From the SF Quantum Board series to the SE Bar style LEDs. Spider Farmer has you covered without breaking the bank. Find Spider Farmer LEDs on Amazon.com. And AC Infinity. Innovators in the air game, providing state-of-the-art inline fans, tents, and more to the home grower. Visit ACinfinity.com or Amazon to pick up some of their products. And you could save money with any of these brands by checking out the discount codes below in the description.
So, boys, maintaining the strain is something that I've been doing longer than most people. I feel like I kept around, what the hell was it? Lemon Skunk for 8 years. Clone after clone after clone after clone after clone. Literally, I didn't do any sort of extra work. I just kept on cloning it. Now, there's a lot of people I feel like who have a misconception that when you clone it, you get a degrading result. And we've talked about that before, and it could happen. But you want to keep that around. How can you do it? Is it just cloning only? Is there other options that you can do? Now, for me, it's been cloning. That's, for the most part, been it. But we talked a little bit behind the scenes kind of about options that you can do that would be actually more sufficient. You know? What do you think?
Yeah. But before we even get to maintain, I wish I started to maintain the strain when I first started. There was so many good genetics that I came in contact with and just that I know I may never get again. So it probably some of the best advice I was given as a creator, because that's, you know, it's a blessing and a curse, your comment section, and more so blessing. But somebody had mentioned, Pigeons, why are you growing seed after seed after seed after seed? Why don't you clone? Why don't you maintain the strain? Try to find something that really gets to you. And I continued the argument that I was always looking for the next best thing. And, you know, one could argue that in order to even find the next best thing, you have to get the best out of the thing that you have. And that's something that I wish, you know, if I could pass on to anyone else, is that you need to try to grow something more than once. And, you know, how do you do that? How do you maintain that strain? That's the argument. And cloning is one way. But what if you forgot? What if you forgot to clone it? And then, you know, you're like, you're looking at this in flower week 7, 8, and you're like, oh, personally, the towel, personally, I've tried re-vegging. I've re-vegged a plant. It worked rather well. It's very time consuming. But it did work. It did work. Have you boys ever tried re-vegging? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to when you're taking a clone in flowering, they can take it at any point in flowering. A lot of people don't think you can actually take clones in flowering, but yes, you can. You can cut a clone even when you're all the way towards the end of flowering, right? You can still cut off a branch, clone that branch. I believe a lot of people refer to it as monster cropping. So it's a kind of term that's passed around quite a bit, is monster cropping, but it is very, very time consuming. You're looking at like 2 weeks at least for it to really, till you start to see new growth as if it's re-vegging. The plant might that clone might kind of look like it's dying out, you know, senescence, or it might kind of fade out with the leaves. But if you have your conditions right and you have your medium right, then it will clone and you'll be able to preserve those genetics. So yeah, I've done that, done regular cloning, done re-vegging, or monster cropping, as some people call it.
Yeah, and I've always called it reverted. So the reverted clones, and that's probably just an ignorant word that I use, bro science. But
monster cropping?
Look at that. Yeah, I don't look at that in the same light as re-vegging. Re-vegging would take that whole plant and put it right back into veg. And I've done that before when there was one that I was like, is this a fucking male? I'm convinced it's a male. And I put it in the room, and it was there a lot longer than it should have been. Started flowering up pretty big, and I said, it's time to go back, lady. Brought her back in, and it took about 3 weeks before she went back into veg. It just was weird looking, and then the leaves were wonky for a little while. The stress that came from it was barely worth it, but I wanted to keep that one around, and I actually did that with Scooby-Doo. That's the one recently. I put a whole, I should have documented it. I just sometimes forget as I'm doing it. But I put like a plant about this big from the pot, not a big one at all, into flower, and then brought it back, and it just was wonky. And now this grow is the bestest look because it grew out. I cloned that one that was better from the bottom, new growth pretty much. And it turned out so much more like what it's supposed to be. It's like that the benefit from doing that, I saw the girth come from it more in comparison to the other time. It seemed like it was more wispy. And so it's like I got the benefit from monster cropping, but at the same time, I didn't have that in mind as I did it. I re-vegged. So you can sometimes get those benefits from that odd stress.
I've re-vegged in a number of different ways. I made a serious attempt to re-veg, and that's when I took a plant that I had harvested and I consciously left 2 or 3 bud sites very low, so that because there's some negative aspects to re-vegging that I'll touch on in a minute. But you leave a few bud sites at the bottom, a couple buds, fair size nuggets. And I put that plant back into the flower room after full harvest and left the lights. I reverted the lights back to 18 and 6. And after way too long, approximately 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, this was years ago, it was a long time, you started to see very awkward, very demented growth. It started out like twisted with odd leaves. And the next thing you know, out of that came the plant itself. You started to see normal leaves, normal stem structure. And then, I was like, okay, let's go. The second time I had harvested a plant entirely, but left a very small bud site. I put that thing in the basement and I left it. I left it for months. It felt like. Came back to it. And sure enough, this thing started to re-veg all on its own. It started to grow new growth right out of that old bud site. And I was like, wow. But I didn't keep it.
Yeah, I think it depends on if you want to keep it, Science is evolving more, but there's old tried and true ways that a lot of people will say is the way to do it is the mother plant, is keeping for cloning, is you're going to get the closest replica, so to speak. I know people who call clones replicas or copies. You got copies?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what do you mean, like paper? Like, no, clones. Like, yeah, I don't know if you guys have ever heard that. Yeah, copies. Maybe it's just an old white guy thing here in Michigan, but it seems pretty common where people will have a mother plant. And I've done it in the past, but if you don't have the space for a mother plant, it's not ideal. You're going to be taking up a large portion of your room that should be flowering, unless you're only keeping that one cultivar and doing a sea of green. That's the only time I think it would work. But you deal with a lot of scenarios where people will do a mother plant and won't flower it. And I've got a buddy who he kills this off, and it always stresses me out. I'm like, what are you doing? Put it outside. But I have a dude that I know has kept it for almost 2 years, man. And you think it would die off, right? But it's like, it just looks like shit. And I don't want to take clones off a mother plant that looks like shit. So there's a fine balance, keep that mother clone and make a new mother from that one down the road after a few times, or move on to a new cultivar. I've never kept a mother plant of headbanger, and it's been fire every time. But some cultivars can degrade over time in terms of the environmental impact. So it just depends on how you're growing and what you're growing in. But the mother plant and cloning is usually the easiest tried and true way that people will go about keeping that genetic around. I just think that there's new advances in science that are making it easier for people to do that. Like I almost said skin grafting. That's so stoned I am.
Just grafting?
Well, like taking it. What is it? Help me out. Somebody.
Grafting? I mean, that is
grafting is. Yeah,
Okay,
they're literally
grafting.
taking one plant and they put it into another plant, and then that one plant grows both plants.
Okay, boom. Like grafting.
Yeah.
Somebody could do this. I'm stoned.
Yep.
And then also, what is the thing where you take a tiny little bit? That's so stoned. It's great. I'm gonna roll another blunt too.
Yep.
But we could take tissue culture. See, this is why if you're watching this or listening on YouTube, we're doing these live now on Twitch. So we've got the chat in front of a live studio audience.
So don't forget, you can watch these live 2 times a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, over on twitch.tv/From the Stash podcast. And if you enjoy these here on YouTube, don't forget, hit that like button. But yes, I do believe you're referring to, tissue culture. I know, I understand
culture,
now.
But grafting as well, both. So both that touched on very good subjects. So
right.
Grafting would be like I wouldn't say the nomad way, but it'd be the way that you got what you got and you're going to make it work. Tissue culture is a little more scientific, and that's going to be something that's a little past my level of expertise where I wouldn't even think about doing that. But a lot of people are right now, because you can just send a piece in and the company will take care of it for you. Have either of you guys gotten into that at all yet?
No.
I'm looking at it like, no chance.
No. Well, I think that's where it's like science is advancing, and it may get to that point where you want to keep a cultivar around, but you don't have the space for a mother plant. Tissue culture. You know, I think that would be an easy way to select your phenotype and not lose it. But it just depends, I guess, what your circumstances are in terms of what you can send in. If you're in a prohibition place, you know,
Right.
stuff.
Go ahead, Chris. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to just go back to you said it twice now. You said that you need space for mother plants. So I just want to don't want to scare anybody away from this, but you can actually do a mother plant in 1 gallon. So you can, I've done it before, keep a mother plant in a small 1 gallon, especially if you're just a home grower, just like me, just like if you're in Canada, you got 4 plants max. You can definitely have a mother plant just in a 1 gallon container. I actually have this on my channel. I've done a couple videos on it, and plastic container is what I used. Although the downside with plastic is the plant will eventually become root bound in a sense, right? And then it could start showing deficiencies. The bigger the plant kind of gets, the more it's going to photosynthesize with the foliage, and it's caused the medium to dry out quicker. So there's a balancing act you kind of have to play when you're keeping a mother plant in a small container. Now, really, you could do it. I think a lot of people refer to it as the bonsai technique, because you're keeping the plant so small, bonsai style. But you could literally veg a plant for 30, 40 days and be able to cut off multiple clones. And that kind of keeps the height small on it, right? It keeps the plant small. And you can always just prune it, cut off branches and throw them away, or put them in your compost pile if you don't need the clones at the time, right? So you can certainly keep them in that smaller container, the 1 gallon. Now, kind of going back to the issue I was talking about, how it becomes root bound in the plastic containers, you can do root pruning. And this is somewhat controversial. I've done a video on my channel before. Actually, I think I took that down, or I reposted on my main channel. But anyway, some of you have seen this, where I actually take a kitchen knife, remove the plant from the container. You see the root zone exposed, and just cutting off about 1 inch off of each side. So really damaging this plant a lot. It took about 2 weeks to recover, but cutting off 1 inch off of each side and then placing it back into repotting back into a 1 gallon container with kind of fresh soil in there. Instead of doing the plastic, you could do the fabric pot, right? And that's going to air prune itself, right? So you wouldn't have to remove it from the container, prune the roots, cut them off, like I mentioned. The air would do it itself. It would prune it itself. So
yeah, well, that's a lot of people I see doing that too, is they'll have those smaller pots, even using something like a basement autoflower set up there.
I was just
the small training pots. You can treat that plant like you're going to put it in the flower and low stress trainer to the point where she looks like she's ready to be flipped, but you're just clipping her and clipping her and clipping her. And that canopy has to refill, and it's going to slow it down just enough where it's not an issue. And I think that's the beauty of it too, is you don't have to deal with having a shitty plant in the room per se. You can still treat it very well, and even feeding it too. Like I'd go a little low on the food. I'd make it strive. Like I wouldn't go real heavy feeding, because you don't want the thing to keep on growing and growing and growing. You want it to slow grow.
Decrease the light and decrease the food. Maintaining a mother is a whole science all to its own. So when you're trying to maintain a strain, you have to still give attention to this mother, or else it's going to get out of control. It's going to get too high. It's going to get too big, too much growth, not enough nodes coming out between stretch. So then you're going to end up throwing the garbage. That's where you referred to your buddy who, culls his mother all the time. Yeah. I've had to do that twice, where I had to just cull the mother because she got out of control. So yeah, maintaining the strain, you're definitely gonna have to maintain the mother as well.
I agree.
Now, something I also haven't dabbled in myself is breeding in general. If you really want to maintain the strain, if you could find a good mother and a good father and bring them together, yeah, that will.
But if that happens, Susan's not happy about that. But if we let them, that's a thing I see a lot too. Headbanger is a prime example. I've got this cod town that has a lot of characteristics of headbanger, but it grows good. I'm like, oh, amazing. It's like somebody said, hey, let's find the right mother, the right father, the bland father that grows very good, and the super dank mama, or vice versa, whatever, and cross them and get the right results out of it. I think breeding is another option, like you're saying there, to keep those certain cultivars around, because you can find those flavors, you can find those certain terpenes and flavonoids that are going to mix right, and you can say, yep, this is just like that. So it just depends, I think, what your goal is in terms of what you're looking for to keep. Is it just that name? Do you need it like a card? Like you got the original one, or is it okay to have somewhat of a replica or a comparable one? Because I don't mind having a different one than Headbanger. It can go.
After I said it, I feel like we'd kind of jumped the gun with breeding, because I feel like that's almost your end result. I feel like once you've maintained a strain long enough, you've found a mother, you've weeded out all others, you know, and then you found something, a male that's gonna the same thing. You've maintained these strains long enough that's like, okay, let's put it together, let's make something bigger. Maybe, you know, that's the end. You know, the entire idea of growing is a journey. It's an adventure. And, you know, what is your end result? That's kind of what you're saying, is where are you going with this? You know, do you enjoy chasing flavor chasers? You know, do you enjoy, you know, the variety of impact on your high? You know, there's a lot of variables that comes to what's your end result. And breeding, I feels like kind of like is the last one. After all that work, now you're going to go to the breeding, the cloning, and the grafting, and the tissue culture, and the, you know, and the veg and the re-veg.
Well, even self-pollinating. Like again, if you're watching this on YouTube or listening to it on all the platforms you listen to things, like the homie Welcome to the Grow Tent. Shout out to him over in the chat on Twitch. Just like he said, lesbo parents, man, if you're able to do that, femming your plants. People do that often. Tell me they don't. Where now this is a thing, colloidal silver or something like that, and they'll go ahead and they'll just breed the mom. You know what I'm saying? Like they'll sex it or self-sex it, so to speak, and they'll self-breed. I see people doing that, but I've had a buddy who gave me seeds before, and it was nothing like his stuff. And I think that could have been him not doing it right. But I don't know. Is the phenotype exactly the same? Is that always the case? I don't know if that's, you know, always the case.
No, it would definitely be a different pheno. For sure. But it would basically just be femming it, right? At that point, you're talking about feminizing it.
Yeah. Well, it's like people will like say they're going to self-pollinate a plant, so to speak, and have it pop out the seeds. It'll be just like the original mother. It's like, again, I just haven't seen it personally, and I'm sure somebody can do it, but I haven't seen it. So it's difficult to say that's an option for sure, but you can try it. If you're listening or watching, you can give it a shot. But myself, I don't really want to have extra seeds or pollen in the room in any way. So I'm not doing any breeding at the moment, but I'm considering it down the road with some of these Vader OG pollen I've got.
Yes, it's definitely something that I need to dabble in as well. You know, when it comes to the next step in my adventure, it comes to breeding. You know, I want to maintain that strain, and a lifetime's worth of work, I feel like, should be geared towards something. And, you know, finding, you know, I really feel as if there's a couple, at the end of the day, you're going to find a few that work for you. Bars. And it's like, you don't have to keep experimenting anymore. You know, you don't have to keep searching. So once you find those ones, there is really a benefit to being able to maintain it and, you know, exploit it through breeding.
I agree. So just before we wrap this convo up, circle it back to the tissue culture side of things. This is a more advanced process of basically taking like a portion of that plant, some of the tissue, and having it grown in an artificial environment, and it's going to grow in a new place. It's not going to be a different process like you're taking the cut itself. Basically, in this area, it's all cell technology. Like this is all done in a lab for the most part. It's going to be very sterile and clean. And some people are doing it at home, but I just haven't seen anybody locally that I know of, or even in the 420 Growers Club doing it. But I know there's some people out there who are probably taking care of it on their own. Is there anything you guys have ever considered even?
No, I don't think I didn't think I had the capability to even do it. So I haven't even dove into it, you know?
And I think that's what the most exciting part of this is when it comes to maintaining the strain. Keeping mothers is extremely oversized and cumbersome. Re-vegging takes way too much time. It's like, if we can get to a point where we can maintain a strain based on just its, you know, not molecular, but maybe cellular components, you know, if we can keep a petri dish in the freezer and say, okay, I would like to have White Widow, and then I'm gonna mix this or not, and try to grow it to something. You know, I totally see that in someday, where rather than having shelves of illuminated clones. It'll be freezers of tissue where we will be able to turn that into something. You know what I mean? And that's amazing. That's amazing to think that we can get to that kind of state.
Well, to have a genetic bank somewhere in the future would be amazing.
Yes.
To keep some of these together. And this is where the proper breeding and the proper identification of cultivars will come in. And until then, it's bro science.
It's bro science. But of course, we do want to know what you guys think in the comments below. When it comes to trying to maintain a strain, is there something that you do that allows you to exploit something longer or make it a little bit easier? We're curious to hear what you guys think in the comments below.
Absolutely. So that being said, it's your boy Rob CLtv, Pigeons, and Mr. Grow It. CLtv, y'all.